When Elder Scrolls players think of the fourth installment, Oblivion, what likely first comes to mind in terms of an antagonist is Mehrunes Dagon, one of many Daedric princes who rules over his realm of Oblivion known as the Deadlands. Dagon is known to be the Prince of Destruction as his domain revolves around ambition, energy, revolution, and change. His goal was to invade Nirn and take over the lands, beginning with Tamriel. He was dangerously close to completing his goal, although many believe Dagon to be the figurehead of the schemes and plans to overthrow the Septim Empire. There's another name that deserves just as much recognition. All of the facts and hypotheses about to be presented are fueled by information provided by the unofficial Elder Scrolls pages and the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion. Important to remember is that this conversation is just for fun and is more so a character study than anything. Mankar Camoran, according to the Elder Scrolls legends, is a male sorcerer of Wood Elf and High Elf descent, although in Oblivion he's shown as being purely a High Elf. He was said to be born in the Third Era, year 267, although there are other reports that claim he could have been born as early as the Second Era. His physical birth was shrouded in omen, as his mother, Khalees, cryptically foretold his birth during the last battle against the Camoran usurper. She would go on to scream all day and all night, proclaiming that Mankar was coming. At the end of the war, she had disappeared with her newborn baby, who's said to be the son of the Camoran usurper himself. Beyond that, not much is known about Camoran's childhood and early adult years. He spent many years in the wildlands of High Rock, and along the way, he took on worship of the Daedra, particularly that of Mehrunes Dagon. As pointed out by several Oblivion NPCs, if you want to see results, it's best to pray to the Daedra instead of the Aedra. As well, Mankar might have turned to Mehrunes Dagon for guidance and praise, as all he knew since birth was destruction and chaos. Dagon eventually chose Mankar as his mortal champion and gifted him the unholy book of the Mysterium Xarxes. It's not foretold why, but Dagon was likely to see how riddled with death and destruction the Camoran bloodline was. It was through the Mysterium Xarxes that Mankar Camoran was able to create his own Daedric realm of sorts, Paradise or Gaiar Alata. Gaiar Alata is mainly where Mankar resided while plotting with the Mythic Dawn and Dagon on how to extinguish the Dragonfires for good and to begin the time of cleansing. Mankar acts as the head of the Mythic Dawn cult, which ultimately worships Mehrunes Dagon. The cult's origins in of themselves are unknown, yet many believe them to date all the way back to the Tiber Septim era, which is decreed as the late 2nd century. This runs in line with the idea of Mankar Camoran being the founder of the cult, as his famous writings, the commentaries on the Mysterium Xarxes, are said to be as old as Talos himself. This is where we begin our conversation on whether or not Mankar Camoran was onto some sort of newfound idea regarding Tamriel's inception. While playing through the quest titled Paradise, Camoran speaks to the hero of Kvatch through their mind. Most of what he says can be seen as provocative and as a means to unnerve the player. He tells us that he knew we were coming to Gaiar Alata and that he was aware of our plan all along. He then informs us that the souls of the slain Mythic Dawn members are sent to this so-called Savage Garden, as they await their time to return back to a new Tamriel. While we continue along through Gaiar Alata and receive the bands of the Chosen, he begins to tell us some new and interesting information. He says, "How little you understand. The principalities have sparkled as gems in the black reaches of Oblivion since the first morning. Many are their names and the names of their masters. The Cold Harbor of Meridia, which as a side note is an in-game error, Periite's Quagmire, the 10 Moonshadows of Mephala, and Dawn's Beauty, the princedom of Lorkhan, misnamed Tamriel by deluded mortals. Yes, you understand now. Tamriel is just one more Daedric realm of Oblivion, long since lost to its prince when he was betrayed by those that served him. Lord Dagon cannot invade Tamriel, his birthright. He comes to liberate the occupied lands." This is certainly a very unique viewpoint brought on by Camoran. He claims that Tamriel in reality isn't some sort of separate realm from that of Oblivion and the Daedra. It is in fact its own Daedric realm, which he calls by the translated name of Dawn's Beauty, and happens to be the domain of Lorkhan himself. He then says that since Lorkhan was betrayed, Mehrunes Dagon is simply invading the lands of Tamriel, as it is his duty and obligation to take it back from the impostors who currently reside and watch over it. Furthermore, as soon as we enter inside of the flooded grotto, Camoran will say this speech to us. Ask yourself, how is it that the mighty gods die, yet the Daedra stand incorruptible? How is it that the Daedra forthrightly proclaim themselves to man, while the gods cower behind statues and the faithless words of traitor priests? It is simple. They are not gods at all. The truth has been in front of you since first you were born. The Daedra are the true gods of the universe. Julianos, Dibella, and Stendar are all Lorkhan's betrayers, posing as divinities in a principality that has lost its guiding light. What are scholarship, love, and mercy when compared to fate, night, and destruction? The gods you worship are trifling shadows of first causes. They have tricked you for ages. Why do you think your world has always been contested ground, the arena of powers and immortals? It is Tamriel, the realm of change, brother to madness, sister to deceit. Your false gods could not entirely rewrite history. Thus, you remember tales of Lorkhan, vilified, a dead trickster whose heart came to Tamriel. But if a god can die, how does his heart survive? He is Daedroth. Tamriel e Daedroth. This heart is the heart of the world, for one who was made to satisfy the other. You all remember this. It is in every legend. Daedra cannot die, so your so-called gods cannot erase him from your minds completely. Picking this statement apart, Mankar claims that the Daedra, in fact, have no more power or purpose. Everything they stand for is nothing compared to the strength and might provided by the Daedra. He then goes on to say that the reason Lorkhan's heart was left beating, but the rest of him was defeated, was because he is in fact a Daedric prince. History remembers him as a god who tricked and manipulated the other divines into doing his bidding, aka creating Mundus. But in reality, Tamriel has always been a battleground between mortals and immortals, indicating that because a Daedric prince created it, the other lords can easily have influence over it as well. Beyond this speech, the rest of what he tells us is more along the lines of how the Mythic Dawn is going to succeed in their plans, and the likes of Oblivion and Tamriel will be rejoined. These are all definitely interesting claims, and it's very easy to dismiss his biases and manipulation. However, did it all Mankar Camoran have a point with what he was saying, or at the very least, is there no evidence to refute some of his claims? To quote the unofficial Elder Scrolls pages, the Mythic Dawn believed that Mundus was simply another plane of Oblivion, governed by the Daedric prince Lorkhan, murdered by the 8 divines. They believed that the world was trapped in lies and illusion, meant to prop up the rule of the Daedra, and that Mehrunes Dagon's true domain was hope and change, and that he would liberate Mundus from the Daedra, granting his followers eternal paradise, which would manifest itself as a small plane of Oblivion. Let's start with the notion that Lorkhan was actually a Daedric prince. The gods and their typing in the Elder Scrolls universe is a somewhat complex conversation, especially since there almost seems to be a tier system for their strength, power, and worship. Anu and Padme are the original forces in which most divinities stem from. Anuic gods are those which believe in order, harmony, and light. The Daedra, or 9 divines, are considered to be Anuic divinities. Some, however, are considered to have Padmaic beliefs, which are that of chaos and change. Most of the Daedric princes, for example, are considered to be Padmaic divinities. These are the ones we need to focus on for now, but you also have the Children of Magnus, the Elnofi, Pelennor Whitestrake, Talos, the Tribunal, etc. Other than the being founded on an Anuic or Padmaic basis, the only other idea that really separates the Daedra and the Daedra are their names. The gods who were either convinced or tricked into creating Mundus with Lorkhan are called Daedra, which roughly translates to our ancestors. This name was likely given to them by the fact that they literally put their life and being into creating the realm and all its life. The gods who wished to have no part in it and instead created their own realms are known as the Daedra, which roughly translates to not our ancestors, as they had no part in creating life or the characteristics of Mundus. It seems as though the line between these two classes of gods is more gray than initially thought. The idea of dividing the Daedra and Daedra into 2 different classifications beyond their efforts put into creating Mundus, and whether or not they are more Anuic or Padmaic, seems trivial. Far less separates the Daedra and Daedra than suggested, and it's maybe because of that Camoran believes Lorkhan was a Daedric prince. In some sense, many look at the Daedra as being corrupt, evil, and chaotic, while the Daedra are looked at as whole, good, and balanced. Due to Lorkhan's actions and his general nature, he's considered to be a Padmaic god. Many legends believe that he in fact tricked and manipulated the Daedra into creating Mundus. This would align Lorkhan closer with the beliefs and tendencies of a Daedric prince. Camoran believes that Lorkhan didn't completely die because he is Daedric in nature, and that his heart survived because of that. Taking Mankar's meaning into my own hands, it seems as though he thought that if Lorkhan did survive, Mundus would be a completely different version of itself, and most of the life that resides on it would be completely altered to some degree, potentially closer to that of a god who rules their realm with Ptolemaic influence like that of a Daedric prince. So therefore, he's simply trying to revert it back to its creator's original design and intention. Let's go a little further into the discussion. If Lorkhan was a Daedric prince, does that give Mehrunes Dagon the right to invade his realm? Other than a few instances, there isn't much recorded lore of Daedric princes invading each other's realms. It seems that according to the Pact Primordial, Daedric princes can't enter into other Daedric realms without an invitation. Without Lorkhan able to invite the Daedric lords in, or perhaps keep them out, it would seem that it wouldn't be so hard to gain entrance into Tamriel from, say, the Deadlands. The only barrier to entry for a Daedric prince would be the Dragonfires and the Amulet of Kings, or in other words, the liminal barriers. Peering at the universe's cosmology, Mundus is simply contained within the confines of Oblivion, and from there, Aetherius. The realms and the worlds don't seem so far apart when looking at it from this perspective, and that could very well be the same viewpoint of Mankar Camoran. Many Daedric princes have tried to invade Nirn, but all plans have since been foiled. Mehrunes Dagon has tried many times to have some sort of influence over Tamriel, as it was he who started the Interregnum period. He also made a pact with Kinlady Esther in order to sack the current powers of the Aldmeri Dominion. Following this, it's alleged that the Camoran usurper used Dagon's influences as they fought alongside the undead and Daedra on the battlefield. It's also believed that Dagon had a hand in the Imperial Simulacrum, when Jagar Tharn acted as Emperor Uriel Septim VII and gave Dagon access to the Imperial Battle Spire. Mehrunes Dagon has clearly been involved in quite a lot of plots to gain influence and control over the continent. However, is Tamriel, or Dawn's Beauty, really the birthright of Mehrunes Dagon, or any other Daedric prince for that matter? It would not appear so. If Quagmire, Cold Harbor, or Moonshadow lost their respective ruler, would Clavicus Vile, Hircine, or Hermaeus Mora, all as examples, have the right to take it over? It's relatively unheard of for this phenomenon to occur. Why would specifically Dagon, as opposed to the other Daedric princes, want to claim Tamriel for himself? Perhaps it's because he's considered the Lord of Change and Destruction. In many ways, the Mythic Dawn preached that Tamriel has to be torn apart and broken down in order to be cleansed and reborn. This seems like a job that Lord Dagon could be capable of doing, or, at the very least, capable of convincing his followers of doing. On the other hand, Dagon's main aspirations include the murder and obliteration of all things mortal and containing life. So, this could be the perfect opportunity for the Prince of Destruction himself to be granted access to Tamriel for his own gain. It's easy to dismiss Mankar Camoran as a manipulated and brainwashed Mer whose life has been so caught up in destruction, chaos, and murder. It's simple to think that Dagon told Mankar what he wanted to hear and tempted him with power and knowledge in exchange to carry out Dagon's schemes on Tamriel, which, at the time, he was unable to influence. However, with the history of the elderscrolls universe and the story of creation having many holes and glossed over points to it, it's hard to say what can actually be considered the truth. Mehrunes Dagon has all the reason to lie to Mankar Camoran for his own gain, but he was the only being present and omniscient during the point of creation who has actually come forward within the Elder Scrolls 4 story. I think in some areas, like Mankar's opinion of Lorkhan, Tamriel being akin to a realm of Oblivion, and why Mehrunes Dagon would be the most opportune Daedric prince to shape Tamriel, could certainly be delved into more. Others, however, like Tamriel being the birthright of Mehrunes Dagon, and that the Aedra are completely powerless and obsolete, can be laid to rest. I'd love to know your thoughts on this down below, and to leave you on a quote directly from Todd Howard himself regarding Mankar Camoran. Terrence Stamp plays some kind of the, he's the bad guy. Somebody who comes from a different line of kings, who wants to make this world his own. So he's kind of a priest. He's not a cackling maniac. We like to have our bad guys be a little grayer. We want that moment where the player goes like, maybe he's right.